Hi there. So, a lot of people find this whole notion of energy healing to be very hard for them to wrap their mind around. And I don't think that it's just indoctrination. I don't think that it's just
Battery low.
limiting beliefs. I think that they really just don't understand how you make it happen. Now, I'm not going to share slides or scientific evidence this time. I'm just going to tell you exactly how I do it, specifically how I did it to resurrect my 10-year-old daughter. Now, this took place in 2000, 2001, one of those. I think it was the year 2000. Um, and forgive me that I don't know exactly anymore because a lot's happened since then. It is 2023. But so I want to start from the very beginning. Okay, around that time, that's when I had been uh, really fully honing my gifts, my skills, testing them to their limits. And um, I had a farm with 5 children at the time. No, excuse me, 4 children at the time. And because my fourth child was um, very quite young, she was like right at a year old when this car accident had happened. But so I had been activating my Kundalini on a regular basis. I was meditating on a regular basis. I was working with electricity and water and fire and smoke and all kinds of things to practice maneuvering them with my will. And um, like I said, I had a farm. So I had several cats, several dogs, chickens, and a lot of chickens, 60 something chickens at the time. But about, 40-ish of them were chicks. They were babies. And for those of you that understand how you take care of baby chicks, you keep them in a separate area if you have a small coop so that the other chickens don't harm them, um, because that's a lot of baby chicks to take care of at once. And so we kept them in a smaller wooden box that we had made ourselves and would bring them outside during the day for sunshine, tip the box on its side so that they could come in and out of the box, learn how to peck, those kind of things. And I had done this one day and then decided I needed to run to the grocery store for some things before I prepared supper. So my children and I went to the store, and while we were gone, we had a surprise pop up shower. It was summertime. And upon returning to the house, I was frantic to check on the baby chickens because baby chickens will drown in the rain if they don't have shelter to get into. And yeah, sure enough, the box had flipped over to where they couldn't get in it from the wind, and all of these baby chickens were laying there lifeless on the ground. Um, I was mortified. My children were mortified. And um, so we grabbed these chickens up, my daughter and I, and we took them into our shop, our barn, and I told her to go to the house, get a towel and a hair dryer for the warmth. She went and did that. I started doing my energy work and putting my um, energy into them. I was focusing on them at their heart rate first, and then on the cellular level of reviving their cells, um, pure and good, no water in the lungs, and all of that kind of thing. And so it was all a visualization process, right? Of like animating them again. And my daughter held the hairdryer on them, towel dried them, held them in a towel, um, put the hairdryer on them for some warmth to help uh, warm their feathers back up, their fur, baby hair, and keep them from being cold and getting pneumonia once they were brought back to life. And so all of this together is what saved these, I want to say 44 baby chickens. And we had done the same thing with dogs that had been hit by traffic that was going down our country road too fast and hit our dog or our cat. Um, I would heal them and bring them back as well. And so my eldest daughter, when she was 10, had been staying the weekend with my mother, and I wanted to come and get her on Saturday because we were planning on leaving Sunday to go camping, and my mother asked if she could keep her until Sunday afternoon and we could wait until they went to church and went to see a Billy Graham special before going to the campsite. So reluctantly, I agreed. But the night prior to that Sunday, I had a dream of them being in a horrendous car accident. I saw the entire thing play out. I saw a truck hit them um, in the side of the car where my daughter was uh, sitting in the passenger seat in the back. And I saw my daughter die. Um, I saw my mother injured. It was just a very horrific dream. And I woke up abruptly, and I told my husband at that time, I was like, this is not just a regular dream. This is a premonition. And I fully believe that we don't have premonitions unless there's something we can do to change the outcome. So I immediately wanted to get up in the middle of the night and go pick her up and not let her go to church and not let her go to see Billy Graham and blah, blah, blah. And my husband um, said that I'm acting erratically, that I shouldn't go and get her right now, that I should just continue with the plans as they were and um, go pick her up at 2 o'clock and we'll go to the campsite the next day and it's all going to be just fine. So I reluctantly stayed at home. I barely slept all night long. And um, the next day, I had this terrible sick feeling in my pit of my stomach the entire morning. Um, and around 12 o'clock, I got a phone call from my sister who lived um, very near my mother. And she said that my mother and my daughter had just left her house to go back to my mom's house for a moment, and then they were planning on heading to the Billy Graham show. And as she went to turn from my sister's and into her road, they were T-boned.
Just a second. Okay, sorry about that. My Bluetooth just went dead. So they were T-boned as they were turning by a truck that had a boat on a trailer that he was carrying behind him. He hit them at 60 miles an hour. Um, we know now that it was actually my mother's fault for turning in front of the truck. She was going legally blind and didn't want to tell anyone. So she's the one that didn't see him coming and turned in front of him. The truck hit my mother's vehicle right in the door of where my daughter sat and her seatbelt broke, her seat broke, and she was thrown into the back of my mom's minivan in the hatchback type area. My mother was all right. She wasn't injured, other than some bruising and shook up. And my daughter lay unconscious and dying, with her brain bleeding out of her eyes and her ears and her nose and her mouth, until the ambulance got there to get her. My brother, who was also at my sister's house when the accident happened, climbed into the back of the car and laid next to her and was already giving her his energy because he knew it was very bad. So that was the start right there. He was giving her some energy to help keep her going for a moment. I lived 35 minutes away from where the accident happened, and by the time I got to the scene of the accident, they had already picked her up by ambulance and met the helicopters, and stat flew her to the nearest children's hospital, which was another hour drive for me. And I could feel her dying. I could feel her. She flatlined 3 times on the way to this hospital. And they kept putting the paddles to her and bringing her back. And every time it happened, I felt it. And that's what we call quantum entanglement. You know, when a mother knows that their child is injured, or even a father can feel this. It's not just exclusive to mothers. Or when your friend or your own mother is ill, or your sibling, or a cousin that you're close to, or someone you haven't even seen in years, but you have a deep connection with them, and maybe they're halfway across the world, but when something happens to them, you get this sick feeling inside of you, and you know. That's what I was feeling. Except it was a very vivid feeling. I knew that she was dying. And every time it would happen, I would scream out in pain and agony for what I felt as what I'm going to call sympathy pains of hers. And every time I would say no, 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 and I would focus on her and keeping her soul intact within the body and life force energy coursing through her. When I got to the hospital, which by the way did not take an hour to get there as it normally would, because my husband at the time was driving about 100 miles an hour to get us there, literally. And thank God we got there safely, and didn't harm anyone else. But he was driving quite fast. And we were put into a waiting room, a private waiting room with a door, all of the family, and awaited what the doctor was going to come to tell us. Well, he came to tell us. Actually, they ended up taking her to another hospital that was closer because she kept flatlining. They had to get her down out of the altitude. So this doctor walked in the room and asked who the mother was, and I stood up. And he informed me that I need to come and say my goodbyes to my daughter because they couldn't keep her heart beating long enough and keep her stable enough to put her back on a stat flight to get her to the children's hospital where she needed to be. Because being 10 years old, they can't do anything for her there. I guess legally, right? Which again makes no sense to me. Now, normally, prior to becoming who I now am, I would have been just like anyone else in that moment, and I would have dropped to my knees and I would have begged God not to take my child. But in that moment, being who I am, I dropped to my knees and I told God to tell me what to do because there is no other option. She's not going anywhere. And very loudly, I heard that Christ voice that speaks to me. And he said, and yes, it's a he said to me, you already know exactly what to do, but you have to do it with zero doubt. And I did know, because I had raised those chickens back from the dead, those cats, those dogs. Everybody would jokingly call my farm a pet cemetery, not because there were animals buried there, but that should have been, because I wouldn't give up on anything. I'm a fighter. I don't surrender. And I certainly was not going to surrender to my daughter's fate, being that she's just done. There was no way. That's my kid. And knowing what I know, I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to ask for mercy when I knew that will is where the way is. And I have strong will. So that doctor, he told me that if I couldn't get up and walk myself down there, that I can't go. And I said, oh, I'm getting up. And I'm going. Show me the way. So my husband and I, we went in that room. There was the doctor and 4 or 5 ER nurses all around her. The machines they had her hooked up to weren't doing anything other than a flat line. She was horrendous to look at. Visually, it was the most frightening thing I'd ever seen in my life. And just to be mildly descriptive, everything on the right side of her body was broken and bloody, and her eyeball was hanging out of her head. There was blood coming out of her eyes, her nose, her mouth, her ears. And my baby laid there broken and dead. So I put my hand on her chest, near her heart, and I placed my other hand on her abdomen, at her belly button, her umbilical cord, where I gave her life to begin with. And with my right hand that was on her belly button, I gave her every ounce of my energy, while I funneled more from the universe into me to keep a constant flow, like a line of electricity. And with my left hand that was on her heart, I started telling myself that I could feel her heart beating again. I had my hand there feeling a heartbeat that wasn't yet there. And within a few minutes, the monitors began to beep. Her heart rate was coming back. Her blood pressure was raising. All of the graphs started to move again and chirp, as they should. And keep in mind, I had blinders on. Mental blinders. Blinders that did not allow me to focus on anyone in that room other than her, and blinders that did not allow me to focus on how incredibly horrific my child looked. Because you can't have any of that type of imagery that creates fear or doubt and have it work. So that's a crucial point to make here. It's much like when you're told in the Bible that during the rapture or the Armageddon or whatever it is, that your feet have to be firmly planted in the foundation of faith, and that you can't see what's playing out before you. You have to see the outcome that you want. That's how we manifest anything. Anything. So I had to do that. And that was definitely the hardest block out I have ever had to do. Before then and since. But I did it. And I got her heart rate going again. And then I saw her energy stabilize from her head to her toes. Her chi flowing through her body again as it should be. So that they could put her on that helicopter and get her where she needed to be. I got in a vehicle and I rode with people to the next hospital. Oh, and let me just add, the doctor and the nurses were astonished and kept trying to talk to me and ask me, what in the hell am I doing? And I would just shush them and go back to my work, my focus. And they did. They shushed. And they watched in amazement as my daughter came back to life and began to moan in pain again. So they put her on the helicopter. And I was wavering in and out of my focal point of attention that I should have been on for the trip there to the next hospital. Because I am human. And I have feelings. And it's very hard to put those emotions aside to do your work. So I had some unwavering moments. And so my daughter flatlined once again on the helicopter getting to the children's hospital. Upon arriving there, we were set in a tiny room and awaited their assessments. 3 doctors came in and explained to us that she had bleeding on her brain, fluid on her brain as well, and that they were going to need to drill a hole to put a shunt, like a bent pipe, to allow the pressure to decrease. But that they couldn't do that right then. It would have to wait to see if she would survive the first 24 hours. And they didn't think that she would. And I adamantly told them that she will, and to don't speak to me that way again. So of course immediately they just thought I'm a distressed mother in denial. So they pulled my husband aside and told him all of the bad news instead, because I refused to hear it. 24 hours later, another assessment had been done. The doctors came in again, and they told me that there is no swelling on the brain any further. So they don't need to put the shunt in, but they're going to go ahead and drill the hole anyway, just in case it starts to come back. And that she probably won't live another 24 hours. Because she had multiple broken bones all over the right side of her body, and she had multiple organs that had shut down and had been bleeding out. And she had broken her right femur completely in half as the impact of the truck hit her and broke her seatbelt and her seat she was sitting in. It also broke her thigh bone, her femur, completely in half. And so she had internal bleeding there as well. So they didn't expect her to live another 24 hours. Well, in the meantime, in this past 24 hours, I was no longer just focused on her heartbeat continuing. Oh, but they had put a mini pacemaker in her, a temporary pacemaker, as of the first night there, that just went right under the skin. But I wasn't focusing on just the heartbeat any further. I was focusing on her healing. And I was healing her the same way that I healed the baby chickens, with seeing it on the cellular level, with all of the cells becoming energized again in a perfect, pure light, healthy way, and no liquid drowning within the body. No waters, no bloods where they shouldn't be, all drying it out, right? Seeing it on a molecular level as the way that it should be. If I had to use descriptive words, there was like an effervescence of bubbles that were drawing the fluids out, is what I was seeing happening with the cells. So the second series of 24 hours had passed, and the other assessment was done. So at this point, she didn't need the shunt. She no longer needed the pacemaker. She also had been on life support to make her organs work, and they took her off of that by day 3. But again, even though at first it was 24 hours, then 48 hours she wasn't going to survive, then 72, on day 3 they said at best she's going to be a vegetable. And I still refused to speak to them. And actually at this point I stopped getting up at 8 a.m. to have meetings with 11 specialists who didn't want to tell me anything positive at all. So I quit talking to them altogether and would simply have the nurse relay messages back and forth from there on. I was in her room every single day, most every night. And at the times that I was not there, a lady from my mother's church was there, who was Wesleyan and believed in hands-on healing. And she secretly, behind closed doors, was doing something similar to what I was doing when I wasn't there. She didn't discuss it with anyone. She didn't know that I was doing it too. And she didn't tell anyone else that she was doing it. But she was putting her own energy into my child to help revive her and help her to recover. By the end of the 5th day, my daughter was fully awake, was talking, eating, bowels were moving, laughing sometimes, also forgetful. Her short-term memory had been damaged temporarily. So then I was also focusing on all of her faculties coming back, her brain functioning the way that it should, because she was a straight A student until this happened. And this little girl didn't know her butt from a hole in the ground, excuse the expression. Suddenly her favorite color was a completely different color than what it was before the wreck. Suddenly her favorite movie was Breakfast at Tiffany's. Her favorite actress was Natalie Wood now, when before it was Marilyn Monroe. So many things had changed. She knew quotes from old movies from the 30s, 40s, and 50s that I don't know how she knew. So that in and of itself is a mystery to me. I don't know if somehow I allowed more of the Akashic information into her mind as I focused on her brain faculties being healed and complete and 100%, or if something within her own soul brought that back from going to the other side. Regardless, she came back with even more information than she had had prior to this. She was only in 5th grade. But I was focusing on the cellular level, how to heal her. Her femur that was broke, I was seeing it mend from a cellular level. Her organs that weren't functioning on their own, I was seeing them being created at birth on a cellular level, full and good and healthy. Like I was recreating her anatomy in my mind. I did the same thing all the way up her whole right side of her body, with every broken bone, including the ones in her face. She had a lot of scarring on the right side of her face as well, from all of the glass that they left lay in her face and her ear for 4 days, because they didn't even bother to wash the blood off of her because they were so sure she would die. I bathed her on day 5. I cut her hair. I removed the glass with tweezers from her face. Every little piece of it I could get. Some of it had already went into her skin and was beginning to heal over top of it, which we were pulling out of her face for a few years after that, periodically. But that's the worst thing that there was about all of it, you see, was that she had residual glass in her skin. She went from being in ICU to a regular room in the hospital, then to rehab, and home in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. She went from dead to 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, going to be a vegetable. She'll never get her memory back. She'll never be the same. She'll never walk again. To home with a walker. She came home from rehab with a walker. Now, in the time she was at rehab is when I began the tough love section of the healing. Every time she started to get down and depressed, I would not allow it. I would tell her to buck it up. You've been through a lot and you've come this far. You can't give up now. I would continue to encourage her and push her. And yeah, I pushed her. And some people thought that I was terrible for doing it. And most parents probably would have babied her and she would have never went to 100%. But I pushed her. Not too hard, not too far, just enough. Goldilocks zone. I pushed her to do her rehab, to do her exercises, because she had to learn to walk, talk, and feed herself all over again. And she was doing it. She was doing it. Within 2 months of the accident occurring, she was going back to public school to be with her friends. This is before I started homeschooling. She ended up graduating from high school at the top of her class. She was not only a straight A student, She was an A honors student. She's highly intelligent. She's very beautiful. She's extremely loving. Oh, and her pelvis was shattered as well in this accident. And they said she'll never have children. And she has 3 beautiful children that are perfect. She's a miracle. And they're a miracle that I made happen. Because God works through all of us. We are all a vessel. Our human body is a vessel. And our soul, our light, is a piece of God, a piece of Source. So I'm not trying to take the credit away from God. I'm just giving it to myself as well to empower you. Because this is not about being limited and at the mercy of anything. There is never a reason that we should have to throw in the towel and give up on any of it unless we have free will to do so. And free will is what we have. The choice is always ours. We can do miraculous things, just as Jesus said. Just as Jesus promised you, that if you walk in His beliefs, in the way that He lived, that you too can go forth and do the same great works as He, and more. And I have tested this to its limits that have none. Ironically, there are no limits other than achieving the outcome you want. And then you've reached your limit, your goal. But I have healed people from major issues that required medical attention, such as surgery or whatever, that after the healings were done, were no longer necessary, no longer needed. Now, when you're working with someone else, they too have to believe that it will happen. And if something in them doesn't feel worthy of that belief to be, then it won't be exactly as it should. The same goes for yourself. If you have something telling you that this is just your fate to have this illness or to have this injury or affliction or problem, whatever it may be, then it is yours. And that's exactly what's meant by argue for your limitations, and they shall be yours. It's exactly what my sign back here means. It says that it all begins and ends in your mind. And what you give power to has power over you if you allow it. It's okay to allow it if it's going to be a positive for you. It's not okay if it won't be. But to see it, to visualize it, to focus on it, and to know that it will be so is how we do anything to manifest into reality what we really deem necessary to be real, to be true. That's where I'm going to leave this lesson. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like, a thumbs up. To all of my subscribers, my deep gratitude and love to you. And if you're not already a subscriber, I would appreciate very much for you to do so and help to amplify the algorithms so that more people can get this message. Feel free to leave a comment, ask any questions. I am here for you now and always. And I will leave you with the most beautiful blessings of love and light.